My name is Andre, 35 years old, and I worked hard for 15 years to buy my dream lakeside home. All those sleepless nights finally paid off. My younger brother Brian has always been the golden child in our family, getting everything handed to him while I struggled. When he asked to use my house for his wedding, I reluctantly agreed, hoping it might heal our relationship. But something felt off about how he kept mentioning the house was perfect for his future. I should have trusted my gut. If you're watching this and have ever dealt with entitled family members, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because this story might just give you the courage you need. Growing up with Brian was never easy. Being 6 years older meant I was always expected to be the responsible one, to set an example, to be mature beyond my years. But that responsibility never came with any recognition. From the moment Brian was born, he became the center of our parents' world. Every achievement of his was celebrated like he had just discovered the cure for cancer. While my accomplishments were met with casual nods and quick, "That's nice," Andre responses before the conversation inevitably shifted back to, "Brian, I remember when I made honor roll for the first time in 7th grade. I rushed home with my certificate, bursting with pride, only to find my parents fawning over 5-year-old Brian, who had drawn a stick figure. My certificate ended up on the refrigerator for exactly 3 days before it was replaced by his drawing, which stayed there for months. These patterns continued throughout our childhood. Brian got the newest gaming consoles, the best birthday parties, the nicest clothes. Meanwhile, I started working at 15 bagging groceries at the local supermarket to save for college, because my parents had made it clear that Brian's education fund took priority. He's more academically gifted, they would say, despite my solid grades. He'll need more support. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough for my first semester of community college. I worked full-time while taking classes, sometimes pulling 20-hour shifts between my job at the supermarket and my weekend gig as a security guard. I lived on ramen noodles and caffeine, watching from afar, as Brian enjoyed a carefree high school experience, secure in the knowledge that our parents had a full college fund waiting for him. During college, I discovered my passion for real estate. It started as a side hustle. I would find undervalued properties, connect them with interested buyers, and take a small commission. By my junior year, I had saved enough to get my real estate license. By graduation, I had built a modest client base. Those first few years after college were brutal. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, pouring every spare dollar into building my business. I would work 18-hour days, showing properties in the morning, handling paperwork in the afternoon, and researching market trends late into the night. Meanwhile, Brian dropped out of the expensive private university our parents had sent him to, claiming it wasn't the right fit. He moved back home, where our parents continued to support him financially well into his 20s. After 12 years of grinding, saving, and strategic investments, I finally had enough for a down payment on my dream home. It was a beautiful lake house, 3 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The property included a private dock and a small stretch of beach. The first night I spent there, I sat on the deck watching the sunset, tears in my eyes, knowing that every sacrifice had been worth it. Brian's life, meanwhile, was a series of false starts. He would get a job, quit after a few months, claiming his boss was unfair or the work wasn't fulfilling. He tried starting several businesses, all funded by our parents, all abandoned when they required actual effort. His dating life followed a similar pattern, relationships that burned bright and ended quickly, usually with Brian painting himself as the victim of unreasonable expectations. Then came Sarah. She was different from Brian's previous girlfriends. More polished, more focused. She had a good job in pharmaceutical sales and seemed to have her life together. What she saw in my brother I couldn't understand, but after just 3 months of dating, they announced their engagement. Suddenly, Brian became obsessed with having the perfect wedding, despite having limited finances of his own. Our parents offered to help, of course, but even they balked at some of his extravagant ideas. That's when Brian called me the first time we had spoken in months. "Andre, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," he began, his voice taking on that wheedling tone. "I knew so well. Sarah and I really want our wedding to be special, but these venue prices are killing us." I knew what was coming before he even asked. The request to use my lake house for his wedding venue came wrapped in compliments about how beautiful my place was, how perfect it would be for photos, how much it would mean to him. And then came the kicker. It would really help us repair our relationship, being part of the most important day of my life. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was a lingering hope that Brian had matured, or perhaps it was just easier than dealing with the family drama that would ensue if I refused. Whatever the reason, I said yes with the clear understanding that this was just for the wedding day and the rehearsal dinner the night before. The first red flag came when Brian and Sarah visited to discuss arrangements. As we walked through the house, I noticed how Brian kept making comments about how the space was perfect for a family, and how the guest bedroom would make an ideal nursery. At the time, I brushed it off as wedding excitement and future planning. Then came the contractors. Brian called one evening to ask if he could bring some people by to look at the space for wedding preparations. I agreed, only to come home and find contractors measuring rooms and discussing renovations. When I confronted Brian, he laughed it off, saying they were just trying to figure out how to arrange things for the ceremony. My parents visited shortly after, and when I mentioned my discomfort with Brian's behavior, they dismissed my concerns. "He's just excited about the wedding," my mother said. "You should be happy for him instead of always being so suspicious. Maybe if you ever settle down, you'll understand how important these moments are," my father added with that familiar, disappointed tone he always used with me. I swallowed my unease and reminded myself it was just for a weekend. How wrong I was. 1 week before the wedding, Brian, Sarah, and their entire wedding party descended upon my house. I had agreed to let them stay for the week, thinking it would make preparations easier. Within hours, my peaceful lake house had transformed into Wedding Central, with people running in all directions, boxes piled in every corner, and constant noise. Brian and Sarah had taken over the master bedroom, despite my protests. "You have 2 other bedrooms," Andre, Brian had argued. "We need the space for all our wedding things." Rather than cause a scene, I relocated to the smallest bedroom, which soon became my only refuge in my own home. What disturbed me most was how Brian showed people around. It wasn't, "This is my brother's beautiful home," but rather, "Let me show you around our place." I overheard him giving Sarah's parents a tour, pointing out features as if he had selected them himself. "I always wanted a view like this," he told them, standing in front of the windows I had specifically designed to capture the lake panorama. "And wait until you see the kitchen. It's perfect for family gatherings." And the wedding planners treated me like an inconvenient houseguest rather than the homeowner. They rearranged furniture without asking, took down my personal photos to replace them with engagement pictures of Brian and Sarah, and once I even caught one of them telling me to stay out of the way during a delivery. 3 days before the wedding, I was sitting on the back deck trying to enjoy a moment of peace when I overheard Brian talking to his best man near the dock. They didn't notice me because of the angle of the house, but I clearly heard Brian say, "This will all be mine soon. No more apartment living for us." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying his words in my head. Around 2 in the morning, I heard movements downstairs and went to investigate. I found Brian in my home office, rifling through my desk drawers where I kept property documents. "What are you doing?" I asked, flipping on the light. Brian jumped, then quickly composed himself. "Just looking for some tape," he said smoothly. "Sarah wanted to hang some decorations." In my office, at 2 in the morning, I couldn't sleep. He shrugged. "Wedding jitters, you know. And I thought I remembered seeing tape in here when you showed us around." He closed the drawer. and smiled. "Your house is really something, Andre. You did well for yourself." "Thanks," I said, not moving from the doorway. "Must be nice having all this space just for one person," he continued, glancing around. I was just admiring it. "Sarah and I dream of having a place like this someday." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As Brian squeezed past me to leave, he patted my shoulder. "You're a good brother for letting us have our wedding here. Family should always support each other." Right. The next morning, our parents arrived. Mom immediately started fussing over Brian and Sarah, while Dad inspected the wedding setup, offering unsolicited opinions on everything. When I tried to discuss my concerns about Brian's behavior, Mom cut me off. "Can't you just be happy for your brother for once without making everything about you?" she snapped. "This is his special day." Dad took me aside later while everyone was busy with flower arrangements. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he began in that tone that always preceded unwelcome advice. "You have this big house all to yourself while Brian and Sarah are just starting out. It would be the decent thing to share some of your good fortune." "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "They're family, Andre. Family helps family. Maybe they could stay here until they get on their feet. It's not like you don't have the room." I was speechless. The entitlement was staggering. Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't result in a blowout fight days before the wedding, Sarah called for Dad's help with something, and he walked away, clearly considering the matter settled. That evening, I called my friend Taylor, who happened to be a lawyer. We had been friends since college, and I trusted her judgment implicitly. After explaining the situation, she was silent for a moment. "Andre, this doesn't sound good," she finally said. "It sounds like they're planning something. Have you checked your documents recently? Made sure everything is secure?" I hadn't, but her question sent another wave of unease through me. What should I do? Document everything, she advised. Take photos of how your house was before they arrived. Make notes of every strange comment or behavior. And secure all your important documents, preferably somewhere outside the house. You think they're actually planning to try and take my house? Even saying it out loud seemed absurd. "I think you should be prepared for anything," Taylor said carefully. "And I'm going to be on call this weekend. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. Day or night." After hanging up, I followed her advice. I spent an hour photographing every room, then gathered all my important documents and locked them in my car. I then backed everything up digitally and sent copies to Taylor's secure email. It felt paranoid, but something in my gut told me it was necessary. The rehearsal dinner that night was tense, at least for me. Everyone else seemed to be having a wonderful time, completely oblivious to my growing anxiety. I watched Brian holding court, charming everyone as usual, and wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe Taylor was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all just wedding stress and misunderstandings. Then I caught Brian looking at me across the room, and the smug smile he gave before turning away chilled me to the bone. No. My instincts were right. Something was very wrong, and the wedding was just the beginning. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself had conspired to give Brian exactly what he wanted. The lake was calm, reflecting the blue sky like a mirror, and a gentle breeze kept the temperature comfortable despite the summer Sunday. I spent the morning helping set up chairs on the lawn, overlooking the water where the ceremony would take place. Professional decorators transformed my deck into an altar space, with an arch of flowers framing the lake view. Despite my misgivings about Brian's intentions, I had to admit it looked beautiful. Guests began arriving at 4, and by 5, nearly 100 people filled my backyard. I stood awkwardly near the house, feeling like a stranger at an event in my own home. A few of Brian's friends nodded politely in my direction, but most ignored me, assuming I was just another guest. The ceremony itself was brief but emotional. Sarah looked radiant in her white dress, and even Brian seemed genuinely moved as they exchanged vows. For a moment, watching them, I felt a pang of something like regret. Maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe this really was just about their special day. That illusion shattered during the reception. Brian gave a speech thanking everyone for coming, and his words seemed innocent enough until he raised his glass for the final toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing on me, "and to starting our life together in this beautiful house, surrounded by the people we love." A murmur of approval went through the crowd, but I froze glass halfway to my lips. Did he just say what I thought he said? A few guests glanced my way, confusion on their faces, clearly wondering if they'd misunderstood. As dinner wound down and the dancing began, I found myself cornered by one of Brian's college friends, Jason, who had clearly been enjoying the open bar. "Great place you got here, man," he slurred, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "Brian's been talking about it for months." "Has he?" I kept my tone neutral. "Oh yeah, going on and on about his family house and how perfect it'll be once they move in." Said something about it being promised to him. Jason squinted at me. "You moving out or something?" I extricated myself from his grip, mind racing. Across the dance floor, I spotted Brian in deep conversation with Sarah's father. I made my way closer, pretending to get a drink from a nearby table. "The investment potential alone is significant," Sarah's father was saying. "Lakefront property like this appreciates reliably. You've made a smart acquisition." "Well, it's been in the family for years," Brian replied smoothly. "Just finally coming to me. As it should." I nearly dropped my glass. The property had never been in the family. I had purchased it entirely with my own money just 3 years ago. Brian had visited exactly twice before the wedding planning began. I confronted him as soon as Sarah's father walked away. "What are you telling people about my house?" I demanded, in a low voice, conscious of nearby guests. Brian's face hardened for a second before his smile returned. "Don't make a scene, Andre. It's my wedding day. You're telling people this house is yours," I hissed. "That it's been in the family and is now coming to you. What game are you playing?" "You're being paranoid," Brian said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me step back. "I'm just making conversation. Now, if you'll excuse me, my wife is waiting." He emphasized the word wife, as if it gave him some new authority. Before I could respond, our parents appeared at Brian's side. "Is there a problem?" my father asked, his tone making it clear who he would side with if I said yes. "Andre's getting worked up over nothing," Brian said before I could answer. "Probably had too much to drink." "Andre," my mother sighed. "Can you please not do this today? Just let your brother enjoy his wedding, without creating drama." I looked between them, these 3 people who were supposed to be my family, and saw nothing but disdain in their eyes. Any protest would only make me look like the villain. I swallowed my anger and walked away, pulling out my phone as soon as I was out of sight. I texted Taylor. "You were right. They're planning something. Brian telling everyone the house is his, that it's coming to him." Her response was immediate. "Document everything. I'll come by tomorrow morning. Don't confront again tonight." The rest of the reception passed in a blur. I moved mechanically through the motions of being a polite host, all while documenting every concerning interaction with my phone. I overheard Brian giving a group of guests a tour of the inside of my house, pointing out features and discussing changes they planned to make. "We'll knock down this wall to open up the space," I heard him say in my living room. And upstairs we're thinking of converting the office into a nursery. By the time the last guest left around midnight, I was exhausted and seething. Brian and Sarah retired to the guest bedroom, while our parents took the small room I'd been using, forcing me to sleep on my own couch. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the creaks and settling sounds of my own house, I pieced together everything I'd seen and heard. This wasn't just about Brian borrowing my house for a wedding. This was a calculated plan to take it from me entirely. The question was, how far was he willing to go, and what did he think gave him the right to even try? Sleep eluded me as I turned these questions over in my mind. Around 4 in the morning, I finally drifted off, only to dream of being locked out of my own home, pounding on the door while Brian and my parents laughed from inside. I woke to the sound of voices and movement upstairs. Groggy and stiff from the uncomfortable couch, I checked my phone. It was just past 8 in the morning. The wedding had ended less than 8 hours ago, and most normal newlyweds would still be sleeping. But apparently Brian and Sarah had other plans. I made my way upstairs and stopped cold in the doorway of my bedroom. Brian and Sarah were inside, measuring the walls with a tape measure. They had already moved some of my clothes out of the closet, piling them unceremoniously on the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rough from lack of sleep. They turned, and I expected at least some embarrassment at being caught, but Brian just smiled broadly. "Good morning. We're just taking some measurements. This room is even bigger than I remembered. Our king bed will fit perfectly against that wall." "Your bed," I repeated, still trying to process what I was seeing. "We didn't want to wake you," Sarah added, as if that was the issue. "But we're just so excited to get started." "Get started on what exactly?" I stepped further into the room, retrieving my clothes from the floor. Brian and Sarah exchanged a look before Brian's expression turned serious. "I think it's time we talked, Andre. Why don't we go downstairs?" In the kitchen, Brian pulled out 3 mugs while Sarah put on coffee. The domesticity of it, the casualness, as if this was already their home, made my blood boil. But I kept my face neutral, waiting. Once we were seated at the table, mugs of coffee between us that I had no intention of drinking, Brian cleared his throat. "So, I know this might seem sudden to you, but Sarah and I have decided to move in permanently. Into my house," I stated flatly. "That's just it," Brian leaned forward. "It's not just your house. It's the family home." I barked out a laugh. "What are you talking about? I bought this place 3 years ago with my own money. It's never been a family home." Brian reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Actually, there's something you should see." He spread it out on the table. It appeared to be some sort of family agreement dated nearly 20 years ago, stating that any major property acquired by either of us would be considered family property, with the younger sibling having priority and claim. "This is ridiculous," I said, scanning the obviously fake document. "I never signed this." "But you did." Brian pointed to a signature at the bottom that looked vaguely like mine. "When we were teenagers, Mom and Dad witnessed it. As if on cue, our parents entered the kitchen already dressed for the day." "What's going on?" my father asked, though his lack of surprise suggested he knew exactly what was happening. "Andre's having trouble remembering the family agreement," Brian explained calmly. My mother sat down next to me, putting her hand on mine in that patronizing way she had. "Honey, you were 16 when you signed it. It was right after your grandfather died. We all agreed that family property should stay in the family with provisions for who would have claim." I pulled my hand away. "This is insane. I never signed anything like this. And even if I had, I was a minor. It would have no legal standing." I turned to Brian. "And this isn't family property. I worked for 15 years to afford this house. I saved every penny while you were dropping out of college and living off Mom and Dad. "Now you're just being hurtful, my mother," said her voice hardening. "Your brother has had his struggles, but he's turned his life around. He has a wife now, and they're planning to start a family. They need this house more than you do." I was incredulous. What about what I need? What about the fact that this is my home that I worked for? "It's just a house to you," my father interjected. "For them, it's their future, where they'll raise your nieces and nephews. Surely that means something to you." I looked between them, these three people, and now Sarah, all watching me expectantly, as if I should just hand over the keys to my life, because they decided I should. And suddenly another piece of the puzzle clicked. "Is this why you married him?" I asked Sarah directly. "For my house?" Her cheeks flushed, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I married Brian because I love him. But yes, knowing we would have a secure place to live, a beautiful home for our future children, that was part of the appeal." He told me it was all arranged. "All arranged," I repeated, looking at Brian. "You've been planning this for how long?" Brian had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but he rallied quickly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we're family, and family takes care of each other. You have a successful business. You can buy another house. We're just starting out." "This is theft," I said flatly. "You're trying to steal my home." "It's not theft if it's a family agreement," my father said firmly. "Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you start packing your personal items today and find somewhere else to stay while Brian and Sarah get settled. The hard way." He trailed off, but the threat was clear. "And if I refuse," I asked, looking each of them in the eye. "Then we'll be forced to take legal action," Brian said, tapping the fraudulent document. "And involve the whole family in an ugly court battle. Is that really what you want, Andre? To be known as the selfish brother who wouldn't help family, who broke a sacred agreement?" The conversation devolved from there. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. My mother cried about how I'd always been difficult, always been jealous of Brian. My father threatened to disown me. Brian alternated between playing the reasonable mediator and making veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't cooperate. Throughout it all, I kept thinking about my conversation with Taylor, about the documents safely locked in my car and backed up to her email, about the evidence I'd gathered during the wedding. Finally, after nearly an hour of circular arguments, I stood up. "I need some air," I said. "And time to think. Don't think too long." Brian called after me as I headed for the door. "The moving truck will be here tomorrow morning. We need you out by then." I didn't respond, just grabbed my car keys and walked out. Once inside my car, I called Taylor. "They're making their move," I said, when she answered. "And it's worse than we thought." I drove to meet her at her office, the forged family agreement tucked securely in my pocket. As I explained everything that had happened, her expression grew increasingly grim. "This is fraud. Plain and simple," she said after examining the document. "The signature is an obvious forgery. And even if you had signed it as a minor, as you said, it would have no legal standing." "What should I do?" I asked. Taylor's eyes met mine, determination clear in her gaze. "You go home and act like you're giving in. Start packing some clothes, maybe some small personal items. Make them think they've won. And tomorrow, when they show up with that moving truck, we'll be ready." "Ready how?" "Leave that to me," she said already, reaching for her phone. "Just make sure you're there to open the door when I knock." I returned to the house to find Brian and Sarah already measuring for new furniture in the living room while my parents sat looking through a catalog of baby items. They all looked up when I entered, expressions guarded. "I've been thinking," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. You're right. Family is important. I just need some time to process all this. The relief on their faces would have been comical if the situation wasn't so infuriating. You're doing the right thing, son, my father said, standing to clap me on the shoulder. I'll start packing some of my things, I continued, but I'm going to need a few days to find a new place. Of course, Brian said magnanimously. Take the week. We understand. This is a big change. I nodded and headed upstairs to the small bedroom where I made a show of packing a suitcase. Through the open door, I could hear them downstairs' voices, excited now that they thought their plan had worked. I heard Sarah on the phone confirming details about the moving truck for the next morning. I heard Brian call someone bragging about their new lakefront property, and I waited, a cold, determined anger settling in my chest. They thought they had won. They thought they could take everything I had worked for. Tomorrow they would discover just how wrong they were. I barely slept that night, but it didn't matter. Adrenaline and righteous anger kept me wide awake and alert. I watched the sun rise over the lake from the small bedroom window, wondering if this would be the last morning I'd enjoy this view, or if Taylor's plan would work. By 8, I heard movement throughout the house. Brian and Sarah were up along with my parents, all of them talking excitedly about furniture placement and renovation plans. I stayed in my room waiting, watching out the window for what I knew was coming. At exactly 9:30, a large moving truck turned onto my street and began making its way toward my house. Behind it came 2 cars that I recognized as belonging to Brian's friends. The cavalry had arrived to help with the takeover. I waited until I heard Brian rush to the front door before finally emerging from my room. From the top of the stairs, I watched as he directed the moving truck to park in my driveway. Sarah stood beside him, practically bouncing with excitement. My parents waited on the front lawn, my father already instructing the movers on which items to take to the truck first. I made my way downstairs and out the front door, moving calmly and deliberately. No one noticed me at first, all too busy with their coordinated invasion of my property. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, and waited. Finally, Brian spotted me and waved cheerily as if this was all perfectly normal. Andre. Perfect timing. Can you show the movers where your desk is? We want to get the heavy furniture out first. No, I said simply. Brian's smile faltered. What? I said no. I'm not showing them anything. Because nothing is leaving this house and none of your things are coming in. The activity around us gradually stopped as people sensed the tension. Brian approached me, his expression darkening. We talked about this yesterday. You agreed. I never agreed to anything, I replied calmly. I just needed you to think I did. Brian's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. We have an agreement. He pulled the forged document from his pocket, waving it in front of me. This house is mine now. If you don't cooperate, we'll get lawyers involved. I uncrossed my arms and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, and Brian took an involuntary step back. Lawyers. That's a great idea. Let's get lawyers involved right now. Sarah moved to stand beside Brian, her earlier excitement replaced by uncertainty. What's going on? Andre is backing out of our agreement, Brian told her, shooting me a venomous look. After everything we discussed yesterday, my parents joined us on the porch, my father's face thunderous. Andre, what are you doing? We settled this. We didn't settle anything, I replied, still maintaining my calm demeanor. You presented me with a fraudulent document and tried to steal my house. That's not settling, that's criminal. It's not fraudulent, Brian shouted, causing several of the movers to look over in alarm. You signed it. I never signed anything, I said firmly. That signature is a forgery and I can prove it. Brian's confidence wavered visibly, but he rallied quickly. It doesn't matter. We have witnesses. Mom and Dad both remember you signing it. Your parents backing up your lie doesn't make it true, I said, glancing at my watch. And now I think it's time we ended this farce. Brian took a step toward me, his face contorted with rage. This house is mine. You're not backing out now. We've already told everyone we're moving in. Sarah quit her job because of the commute from here. We've bought furniture. Not my problem, I replied, checking my watch again. What do you keep looking at your watch for? My mother demanded. I smiled again, this time genuinely. I'm waiting for someone. As if on cue, a car pulled up behind the moving truck. Taylor stepped out, along with 2 other people in professional attire and a uniformed police officer. Brian's face went pale. Who are they? Sarah asked, her voice small. That, I said with satisfaction, is my lawyer. And she's been expecting this moment since before your wedding day. Taylor approached with confident strides, her colleagues and the police officer following close behind. I stepped forward to meet them, relief washing over me at the sight of reinforcements. Good morning, Andre, Taylor said professionally, though I could see the glint of battle readiness in her eyes. Are these the individuals we discussed? She glanced at Brian, Sarah, and my parents, who had unconsciously grouped together on the porch. Yes, I confirmed. And they were just about to move their possessions into my home based on this document. I handed her the forged agreement that Brian had been waving around. Taylor examined it briefly before passing it to one of her colleagues. Standard forgery. Not even a particularly good one. She turned to Brian. Mr. Sullivan, I presume I'm Taylor Washington, Mr. Andre Sullivan's attorney. I understand you're attempting to claim ownership of this property, based on a family agreement. Brian's earlier confidence had evaporated, but he tried to rally. This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. Attempted property theft very much concerns me, Taylor replied coolly. Especially when it involves fraud. She nodded to the police officer. Officer Reynolds is here to document the situation and take statements regarding the forged document. My father stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. Now wait just a minute. There's no need for police. This is just a misunderstanding between brothers. A misunderstanding that involves a forged legal document and attempted property theft, Taylor corrected. She turned to her other colleague. Mr. Patel is a forensic document examiner who will be happy to testify that the signature on this agreement is not Andre's. Brian's friends, who had been watching from their cars, slowly began to back away, clearly wanting no part in what was unfolding. The moving truck driver approached cautiously. Should we start unloading? Or... No, Taylor said firmly. This residence belongs to Andre Sullivan. No one has permission to move any items onto the property. This is outrageous, my mother sputtered. We're family, we're just trying to help Brian and Sarah start their lives together. By stealing my client's home, Taylor raised an eyebrow. That's an unusual definition of help. While this exchange was happening, Taylor's second colleague had discreetly moved to the perimeter of the property. I now noticed he was directing 2 additional men in uniform security personnel from a private firm. Taylor noticed my observation and explained security team to ensure no one attempts to enter the property without permission. Standard procedure in cases like this. The police officer who had been quietly observing now stepped forward. I need to see documentation proving ownership of this property. I retrieved the folder Taylor had prepared containing my deed mortgage documents, tax records, and insurance papers, all clearly showing my sole ownership of the house. The officer reviewed them carefully while Brian and my parents watched in growing dismay. Everything appears in order, the officer confirmed. Mr. Andre Sullivan is the legal owner of this property. He turned to Brian. Sir, do you have any legal documentation supporting your claim to this property? Not this, he added, gesturing to the forged agreement. Brian's face had gone from pale to red. This is ridiculous. Andre, call off your attack dogs. We can work this out. I tried to work it out, I replied evenly. You responded by forging documents and trying to steal my home. Taylor stepped closer to Brian, her voice low but clear. Mr. Sullivan, my client, has provided evidence that you attempted to fraudulently claim his property. We also have documented evidence of your statements to wedding guests about taking possession of this house and witnesses willing to testify that you've been planning this scheme for months. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly turned on Brian. Months. You told me the house was already yours. You said it was settled. Her voice rose with each word. You made me quit my job for this. Brian reached for her arm. Sarah, baby, calm down. I can explain. She jerked away from him. Explain what? That you lied to me. That you dragged me into a fraud scheme. She looked around wildly, seeming to fully grasp the situation for the first time. Oh my God, there's a police officer here. Am I going to be arrested? You're not under arrest at this time, the officer clarified. But I will need statements from everyone involved. I had nothing to do with this. Sarah insisted, backing away from Brian. He told me the house was already his, that it was a family arrangement everyone had agreed to. The unity of their little conspiracy was crumbling rapidly. Sarah continued to distance herself from Brian physically and verbally. My parents, seeing the legal team and police officer, began to backpedal on their earlier statements. We might have misremembered about the agreement my father offered weekly. It was a long time ago. 20 years, you said, Taylor reminded him. Convenient that no one mentioned this agreement until after the wedding, isn't it? Brian, seeing his support system collapse, made one last desperate attempt. Andre, please. We're brothers. Blood. You can't do this to me, to us. What about family loyalty? Family loyalty. I repeated incredulously. You tried to steal my home, Brian. You forged my signature. You lied to your wife, to our parents, to your friends. That's not loyalty. That's exploitation. The situation devolved rapidly after that. Sarah demanded to be taken back to their apartment, refusing to even look at Brian. My parents, realizing the serious legal implications of what they'd participated in, began making excuses about being misled by Brian. Brian himself oscillated between rage and pleading, threatening legal action, one moment, and begging for forgiveness the next. Through it all, Taylor and her team maintained a professional demeanor, documenting everything and ensuring the property remained secure. The moving truck driver, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, approached me apologetically. Sir, we were paid in advance for this job, but given the circumstances, we'll be leaving now. Should we return payment to someone? Bill them for your time, I suggested, gesturing to Brian. The contract was with them, not me. As the movers packed up and prepared to leave, Brian made one final appeal, his voice breaking. Andre, please, where are we supposed to go? What about our furniture? Our plans? I looked at my younger brother, really looked at him, and saw for the first time how pathetic he truly was. All his life, he'd relied on others to provide for him, to clean up his messes, to give him what he wanted. He'd never built anything of his own, never worked for his achievements, and now his greatest scheme had fallen apart, exposing him for what he was. That's not my problem, Brian, I said finally. You have an apartment. You have parents who are clearly willing to support you. Figure it out yourself for once in your life. I turned my back on them and walked into my house, Taylor, following after ensuring the security team had their instructions. Behind me, I heard the moving truck pulling away, heard Sarah's continued recriminations, heard my parents' attempts to smooth things over. But for the first time in days, what I heard most clearly was silence within my own home. My home. The one I had earned. The one I had protected. The one that was finally definitively mine alone again. In the weeks that followed, what I now call the moving truck incident, I found myself navigating an emotional landscape I hadn't anticipated. The immediate relief of protecting my home gradually gave way to deeper reflections on family trust and self-worth. The first few days were the hardest. Despite everything, there was a hollow ache that came with cutting ties to my family. Even toxic relationships leave a void when they end. I found myself jumping at every phone ring, half expecting another attempt at manipulation or guilt-tripping. But the calls never came. Taylor had helped me file a restraining order against Brian, though it proved unnecessary. According to mutual acquaintances, he and Sarah had separated immediately after the incident. She moved back to her parents' home in another state, while Brian reportedly crashed on friends' couches until our parents reluctantly took him in again. My parents made one attempt at contact, leaving a voicemail that was more justification than apology. "We only wanted what was best for the family," my mother's voice had said. "Someday you'll understand that family means sacrifice." I deleted the message without responding. The house felt different now. Larger, emptier in some ways, but also more genuinely mine. I spent weekends reclaiming spaces that had been temporarily invaded, repainting rooms to cover the measurements Brian and Sarah had made on the walls, rearranging furniture to better suit my preferences rather than wedding logistics. Taylor visited, often helping me process the legal and emotional aftermath. What they did wasn't just morally wrong, she explained over coffee on my deck one evening. It was criminal. Forgery, attempted fraud, conspiracy. You could press charges if you wanted to. I considered it briefly, but ultimately declined. Legal punishment wouldn't teach them anything they haven't already learned from failure, I decided. And I don't need to waste any more of my life on their schemes. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. Not just my sense of security in my home, but my concept of what family truly meant. Blood relationships had failed me spectacularly, but other connections proved far more reliable. My neighbors who had watched the wedding and its dramatic aftermath with bewilderment became regular visitors. Ellen from next door brought homemade bread and stayed for hours, sharing stories of her own family estrangements and reconciliations. Jack from across the street helped me build a new dock, the physical labor and casual conversation, healing in ways I hadn't expected. Taylor introduced me to her circle of friends, people who accepted me without the weight of lifelong expectations or comparisons. For perhaps the first time, I found myself building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. About 3 months after the incident, I received an unexpected letter from Sarah. She apologized for her role in Brian's scheme, explaining that while she truly hadn't known about the forged document, she had ignored red flags about his claims to the house. "I wanted so badly to believe in the future he promised," she wrote. "I let that desire blind me to the inconsistencies in his story." She went on to share that investigations had revealed Brian had attempted similar schemes before: an ex-girlfriend's family cabin, a friend's investment property, even a distant cousin's inheritance, all targeted through various manipulations and false claims. None had progressed as far as his attempt to take my house, but the pattern was clear. "I'm sharing this not to excuse my participation," Sarah concluded, "but to help you understand that this was never about you specifically. Brian sees others' possessions as opportunities, not as the results of their hard work and dedication. I hope knowing this helps you heal." Strangely enough, it did. Understanding that Brian's behavior stemmed from his own pathology rather than any specific failure on my part helped me release some of the lingering doubt I'd carried. Had I somehow invited this betrayal? Could I have prevented it with clearer boundaries or different choices? Sarah's letter helped me see that Brian would have attempted to take advantage, regardless of what I did or didn't do. As the seasons changed and my lake house witnessed its first autumn under truly secure ownership, I found myself hosting a small gathering. Taylor and her husband, my neighbors, colleagues, who had become friends, all gathered on my deck, sharing food and laughter as the leaves turned golden around us. A toast Taylor proposed raising her glass. To Andre, who taught us all an important lesson about standing your ground. I smiled but shook my head. If there's a lesson in all this, it's one I'm still learning. Something about how family isn't defined by blood, but by respect. About how the people who truly care for you want you to keep what you've earned, not take it from you. Jack nodded thoughtfully. And about preparation. You were ready when they made their move. Most people wouldn't have been. That was true. If Taylor hadn't helped me secure documentation and gather evidence, if I hadn't listened to my instincts about Brian's intentions, the outcome might have been very different. Not legally, perhaps, but the emotional and financial toll of a protracted fight would have been devastating. As the evening wound down and my guests departed, I stood alone on the dock, watching moonlight play across the lake. The water was calm, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. The peace I felt wasn't just about keeping my house. It was about establishing a life built on authenticity. I no longer jumped when the phone rang. I no longer felt the need to justify my success or apologize for having more than my brother. The guilt and obligation that had shadowed me since childhood had finally lifted, leaving room for genuine connections and uncomplicated joy. The house was quiet now, but not lonely. It was filled with the echoes of honest laughter from the evening's gathering, with plans for the future that were solely mine to make, with the quiet confidence that comes from protecting what matters. I realized then that sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family that helps us thrive. Sometimes we need to create our own circles of support built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. And sometimes standing firm against those who would take advantage of us is the most loving thing we can do, not just for ourselves, but for them too. By refusing to enable Brian's scheme, I had forced him to face consequences that our parents had always shielded him from. That night I slept soundly in my own home, in my own bed, secure in the knowledge that I had not only protected my property, but had also broken a lifelong pattern of manipulation and entitlement. The lake house remained mine, but more importantly, so did my future, free from toxic obligations and false loyalties. If you've ever had to stand up to entitled family members or protect what you've worked hard for, I hope my story gives you courage. Family should lift you up, not tear you down. Love should never be used as leverage for personal gain. And sometimes the strongest boundaries are the ones that require the most courage to establish. Have you ever had to protect something you worked hard for from someone who felt entitled to it? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, you deserve to enjoy the fruits of your labor without guilt or apology. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to protect what matters most to you.